Well, hello everyone. I'm Rosie Hurst from Impact, and I'm here today to chair a session on financing the repayment of recruitment fees. It sounds like a bit of a dry topic, but obviously in the end, it's all down to money. So thank you very much for listening to this, which is a novel idea for how to pay for the repayment of recruitment fees. I'd like to thank IHRB for inviting us all on to talk about this new idea, and also very much for driving both remedy and grievance in this year's conference. I'm joined today by Johan Verberg, who is Head Sustainability Policy at Rabobank, by Martin Beermans of Proud Capital, by Heidi Kista Oliveira, who's Global Director of Social Impact at Mars, and of course by Didier Bergeret, who is Director of Social Sustainability at the Consumer Goods Forum. So we have a cabinet of all the talents, and hopefully this mixture of sustainability people and finance people will help us work our way through the maze of how to finance the repayment of recruitment fees. So workers and their support organisation strongly advocate the importance of remedy, grievance mechanisms and remedy, because that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where workers are able to access what is important to them, which is why I'm so delighted there's this focus on remedy in this year's forum. This isn't the only session on remedy. I should say a couple of plugs for some other sessions. In particular, check out the Road to Remedy session, which is a no-holds-barred presentation or interview, in fact, with a key person from Top Glove, the rubber glove company, which has been all the way down this road and has repaid recruitment fees at scale. And anyone interested in this topic, that's a fascinating session. That's moderated by IHRB. We also have on human rights due diligence, moderated by the Remedy project, a very good session looking at the importance of grievance mechanisms in different contexts and different approaches. So those are kind of parallel sessions to this one. And if you're interested in this, you'll probably be interested in that. But this is the second of the sessions which are about financing. The other session is called The Future of Responsible Recruitment, Innovative Finance Models. And whilst this looks at remedy, the other session looks at emerging innovative financing tools to incentivize responsible recruitment in the first place. So I'd strongly recommend tuning into that one as well. That's moderated by Labour Mobility Partnerships. So let's now focus on what we're talking about today. Remedy of recruitment fees. Now, we at Impact have worked on hundreds, literally, of recruitment fee repayment cases, working, I think it's with more now than 220 different companies on repayment. And what we find is one of the key obstacles to getting the repayment through. There's lots of technical stuff. We can talk about the technical stuff, but actually, the key obstacle is financial. Lack of access to finance, both actually in terms of responsible recruitment and in terms of repayment. This session looks at how to access finance for repayment, which I know is one of the burning questions which companies starting to approach this have. So let's have a very brief summary of the problem. So recruitment fees are one of the key problems facing migrant workers and employers. Because it means that migrant workers turn up on their first day of work already indebted, which means they're heavily exploitable. They're likely already experiencing at least one of the elements of forced labour, of the indicators of forced labour. So if we can expunge recruitment fees, and if we can get those people out of forced labour, then we're levelling the playing field. Now, the thing workers want most is that hard cash back because it gets them out of debt. But they also want this straight away in one lump. And this is where we tend to hit problems, because previous models looked at repaying recruitment fees over a period of time. But of course, as long as that recruitment fee is being paid, as long as the recruitment fee is still outstanding, the worker is still in debt bondage. So when you have long repayment periods, you're actually increasing the risk. So that's the problem. But on the upside, we're seeing a lot of activity and a lot of clever people trying to solve this problem. And hopefully I've brought some of the clever people together today to talk to you. So what we're going to be talking about today is two things. Number one, what is the problem with remedy? Why is it so difficult? And number two, how a remedy bond solves some of those problems, and how, in partnership with lots of other actions, the remedy bond can also support the solution of other problems along the line. So I'm going to turn actually first to Didier, and say, look, one of the first issues that hampers repayment is the question of how much to pay, to whom. There are no receipts, so nobody knows exactly, there's no hard evidence of how much should be paid. So it's a big problem, this. How are you guys at the CGF tackling it?
Thanks, Rosie, and thanks again, IHRB, for welcoming us to this webinar. The question you raise is actually true. We talk a lot about debt bondage, but the question of what is it based on and what are the fees that workers pay throughout their journey to land a new job isn't clear. I think we've been calling for a list on every meeting I attended since the last 7-10 years about the issue of recruitment fees, but it's not that simple because they vary according to the country of origin, country of destination. They vary between what's legal, what's not. So you have a lot of unclarity. But largely the problem is also that most workers paying fees are actually paying them without getting receipts of what they paid for, because most of them are being charged in an informal sort of way. So throughout their journey, they end up paying things that they shouldn't pay for, but for which they also don't have a receipt. So how to be able, as an employer that wants to be responsible, to be able to define what to pay back and to whom. And I would say, well, I mean, there is no easy solution, but since, thanks to IHRB, notably, the issue of responsible recruitment is really high on the agenda, we witnessed a lot of evolution. But the first thing, if we really want to put an end to recruitment fees, would be to work first in the origin country or geography and clarify that no worker should pay for a job as per some of the CGF priority industry principle. Clarifying that should prevent people to effectively be charged with unreasonable fees that they shouldn't have been asked to pay in the first place. But next to that, I think the pre-departure orientation training that can be practiced in many countries for workers migrating from one country to another should definitely bear this essential element of asking for receipts and not paying anything without getting a proper proof of payment that can then be constitutive of a calculation of repayment for employers in the country of destination. But since the situation is already happening and many workers have been paying fees, what do you do then? Well, it's actually mostly about making sure you map and investigate the recruitment process to identify what fees have been paid. And for that, as per some of the guidance existing, but also the soon to be published guidance for the CGF about remediation and repayment of fees, which is directly derived from Impact's great work on the issue. The idea is really to look at a fast and easy investigation process that still needs to be thorough, so revolving around an independent, credible assessor, helping you to effectively do the right things with the right techniques and the right approach, starting with sampling the workers, making sure they're representative, that you can interview them in their language, for instance, and that they represent the workforce so that you can get some hands-on data, guaranteeing that you get an overview of what fees have been charged to workers depending on where they're coming from. And since it's not always clear and workers themselves may not always have all the information at hand, what you should bank on is effectively to triangulate whatever you can in terms of data. So looking at what workers say, see how much evidence you get about the same fees being paid over and over again, but also look at existing research and possibly reach out to unions, worker representatives, community leaders, whoever from the stakeholder community that can be relevant in telling you what the truth is about the costs being charged to workers, acknowledging that most of them are difficult to identify, but that many of them are effectively being charged to workers and they don't realize themselves that they are in a situation of debt bondage that they should and could have been avoiding if responsible recruitment was a reality.
Absolutely. And I hugely welcome the upcoming guidance from Consumer Goods Forum, because obviously with your membership, it levels the playing fields. And I think when everyone is using the same set of standards, the same set of guidelines, then those market signals are going to be very, very much clearer. So hugely important step. And I'm going to turn to you, Heidi. So even with the standard agreed, there are some other barriers. I know you're grappling with, along with many other people actually, with the practical problems of repayment in the real world. What are the key blockages that you find?
Yes, thank you, Rosie, and thanks to IHRB for inviting us here. Yeah, exactly that. I'd love to talk about some of the challenges we're seeing as we're starting to experiment with different ways of looking for this issue of fees and addressing it across a value chain. So from our own operations to what we refer to as tier one suppliers, those that we've got a contractual agreement with, all the way to the extended supply chain where palm oil comes out of the ground, where cocoa comes out of the ground, where fish come out of the ocean, for example. We are finding that there's different levels of leverage and local engagement across those points in the value chain, and that can be a challenge. So of course, in our own operations, we have increased visibility, influence, and control. But as with many of the issues in the business and human rights space, when we get to the extended supply chain, where we aren't directly purchasing, could be 10, 12 tiers away, that traditional level of visibility, influence, and control can wane. So one of the blockages is how we increase leverage, increase visibility and transparency across the value chain. And from a local engagement perspective, in different geographies, you won't be surprised to know we see different levels of government engagement around definitions, around enforcement. Sometimes the best laws are on the books, but for a range of reasons, they aren't enforceable or they aren't enforced. So that level of an enabling environment, those two together, our leverage and local engagement, can form a real blockage or a real unlock. The second sort of set of challenges that we're seeing in our work around the status quo and the stigma of this topic. So again, in certain geographies, we hear from migrant workers themselves that the idea that they wouldn't pay a fee sounds like a scam because the current model of recruitment in several parts of the world is so fraught and so inadvertently unethical, so to speak. The prevalence of recruitment fees is the status quo. So that's a barrier to tackling this issue, particularly with small, medium enterprises that may be operating in that kind of a geography. The second on that parallel is the stigma. So often, these recruitment fees can be tied to illegal activity, criminal activity. There's a stigma, again, for a company to proactively look for this challenge, raise their hand that they found it, and start to address it. So those complexities of the optics of proactively looking for this problem, I think are still a barrier, unfortunately. And the third pair of challenges that we're seeing and working through are around the complexity and the cost. So very much what Didier was saying, we still find disagreement about what is a fee, despite having the ILO's definition. But it's very helpful to have these common coalescing definitions we can point to, whether that's steps to repayment or whether that's at the very beginning, what is it that we are repaying and why? But the complexity of the pure logistics, the tactical elements of this, how is repayment happening? When, how often, what mechanisms are used physically to move cash from one spot to another? That complexity can get in the way of getting on with that action of repayment. And finally, the cost. So as you mentioned, the pure dollars and cents, but in some cases, the fees that exist in specific corridors are significant. And for a small, medium enterprise to address those fees at once could have an impact on their cash flow, their ability to continue their business. So being cognizant of that costing mechanism, I think it's a challenge that we need to unlock. Unfortunately, we've got some brilliant minds on the line with a great idea on that topic. I think the last bit around that costing is just the bigger picture. If we zoom out, what we're all after here is that the true cost of recruitment is factored into the cost of goods. So whether that's an innovative price per ton model or what have you, but hopefully we'll get more into that. But I just wanted to put that on the table as well.
Absolutely. I think this is super useful because you've just placed it in the holistic world of the real world that we live in of supply chains and economics. So I think moving towards true cost is where we need to get to. But I just want to go back to Didier and talk a little bit, perhaps ask you a little bit more perhaps about that stigma thing. I know that some people, when they first start thinking about repayment, are concerned that they may just fuel existing corrupt systems, right? Because as we've discussed, you said informal, I say corrupt. But yeah, I mean, there's some not very many people, not very nice people out there. But there is this worry that repayment can just fuel that and form part of a vicious circle. Is that your experience?
Yeah, and I think so. We just had a supplier engagement meeting as part of our project, which is about people positive palm, literally looking at how to make sure palm oil is produced responsibly, including the social elements. So fees are huge, especially in Malaysia. And the reality is that even workers, once interviewed, from what we heard from prominent suppliers, they sometimes take up to 9 months to admit that they had paid fees. So it's, as Heidi was just mentioning, it's a stigma, but it's an entire mindset culture that is engraved and for which people believe that the more they pay, the better the job opportunity would be, or that, they have to because it's the way it is. And this unclarity can be solved with constant reminder that no worker should pay for a job, but also getting everyone around the table to design or redesign responsible recruitment market that are beneficial for countries of destination who need the labor force, but are tremendously helpful for countries of destination when remittances are being paid. Effectively, you contribute to country development, and everyone should see the positive side of it, as long as the worker on the way do not get trapped into debt bondage, which sort of takes out all this positive cash from the economy, from paying back the families, paying back the taxes, everything that is positive. All of this, if it ends up in some criminal activities and to fuel this type of unresponsible recruitment model, is to be avoided at all costs.
Absolutely. And of course, we have the burning platform as well with the US Tariff Act, which has banned the import of certain goods into the United States on the basis of forced labor. So this has moved from being something which is an arguable point in a way, depending on what your laws are in a particular country, to becoming a real hard market access point. And I think that's really focused everyone's minds. And now I'd actually like to say thank you to the sustainability people, and let's now bring the financial people in. And it's been very interesting working on this because sustainability people and financial people don't often talk much. And I think that's the purpose of this session really, is to try and bring into a sustainability audience the views of the financial community. So Johan, when you and I first started talking about this, as a non-banker banker, you have been kind of acting as a translator. First, could you explain the concepts? What is a bond? Because I'm willing to bet that at least half the listeners to this session won't really be able to answer that question. So please enlighten us.
Yeah, thanks, Rosie. A bond is just a big pot of money that you put in the middle when you have a collective problem. Such as in this case. Well, let me start by saying that I'm very happy to see that this conversation, also thanks to IHRB's facilitation, moves from a procedural thing of providing access to remedy to actually providing remedy to people on the ground and making an impact to people. And those people, as well explained by the previous speakers, they need to be repaid their recruitment fees sooner rather than later. And the employers who would be taking a role in repaying those recruitment fees would need to act fast, but would have a problem with the related cash flow. Now, that's particularly in business terms, a problem you can solve through loans, but in this particular circumstance, there's not a specific individual bank, let alone an individual buyer at the end of the market value chain that would pay for it. That collectiveness makes the need for that central pot of money. Now, let me show you a slide to explain a little bit how that would work out in practice. So the employees on the right hand side would need to be repaid their recruitment fees by their employer, company A. Company A doesn't have the cash flow, so can be provided a loan from a central fund or a central bond rather, issued by a particular party with no commercial interest, like this bank doesn't have a commercial interest in the bonds, but rather serves as an arranger. The repayment of the loan would be done, and it's not with a high cost, especially because of the social conditions that apply to it. So you can make it a social impact loan. Now that fund, of course, needs to be filled, and you need contributors from the traditional type of what we call equity investors, those who provide money upfront. Those could, in this case, be governments, but you also would want to have participants who invest in that fund, and in turn, when loans are repaid, get their investment repaid again at a market rate or sub-market rate, because of the social component that compensates for the lack of a commercial interest. Now you also see a little bit of a dotted line there in the bottom, which is there because the bond investors could be companies who are among the buyers of the products that companies A, B, and C are producing. They feel a collective responsibility to contribute to that collective solution without paying through the normal supply chain link, but actually through this financial structure link.
So that's clear. So this is a solution which means people with money can lend that money to solve this problem in the certainty they'll get that money back and maybe a little bit more. Is that how it works?
That's indeed how it works. And since the commercial part of the story is considered less relevant or irrelevant for some parties, you can do this within the market system, but without making it like a very big different animal. It's different in the sense that it facilitates and speeds up the repayment of the recruitment fees, governed by mechanisms that, on the one side, check on the repayment of the recruitment fees. That's where your organization, Rosie, has developed principles and guidelines to secure that is happening in the proper way. Then there are social loan principles that govern how that loan is provided and paid back, including, for example, the condition that companies A, B, and C also preventatively work on no longer making use of recruitment fees in their employer roles. And then on the left-hand side, there is the social bond principles, again provided by international organizations, to make sure that is properly governed as well.
And I suppose actually that, I mean, sometimes social and green bonds are criticised for perhaps not having the impact that they should have, shall we say. But with this one, the impact would be huge, wouldn't it? Because it would actually be repayment to named individuals of sums of money which they owe. So when it comes to fulfilling the social impact side of the bargain, this looks like quite an effective mechanism. And maybe on that note, I should turn to our last speaker, Martin Biermans, who is actually a proper banker. He is, which is super important actually, because as I say, this is all about trying to communicate between the financial world and the sustainability world. So Martin, I know you're we call you the bond wizard, you're hugely experienced in this area. And I was wondering whether you could explain about what you're doing at the moment, which is something super similar, but in a different field, in the world of decarbonising shipping. Can you explain how that works and maybe how that's related, how that model could be used for this?
Yes, and I would like just to say and echo everything that has been said by everybody on being very pleased to be here, and thank you so much for the organizers to vote time on this very important topic. So in my daily job, I'm a partner at Prow Capital, which is a private debt fund. So in essence, actually, we take up the role that traditionally was held by banks by offering senior secured loans, and we're targeting a very specific audience, namely the shipping industry, and we offer loans to ship owners so that they can build new, less polluting ships, or indeed refurbish or retrofit existing ones, and whereby these ships will then outperform the sustainability standards that have been set out by quite some margin, because we think that the decarbonization process is not nearly as quick enough as it should be at this moment in time. So we really want to speed that up, and that's why myself and my partners created this fund with investors, outside investors, to offer these loans and to sort of step into a void that was created with banks actually withdrawing from this particular sector. Right at the time that they needed more money, and I think that sort of is also a little bit where my daily operations and also this particular topic sort of interconnect. For starters, we not only of course look at the decarbonization when we are doing a loan, we also look at the entire operations of the company. So it's quite often actually that we are the first persons to introduce the language of the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises, of the UN guiding principles to these companies, and we also help them to explain what that is and why it's important, because we do due diligence on that, especially in shipping, of course, where there's a lot of labor-related issues historically. So, and well, we don't want to get caught out with financing the green vessel of an otherwise very immoral and very dirty company. So, you know, it needs to fit in the entire picture. Now, coming back to then the remedy component and how you can provide funds to speed up. And I think that the angle of time is very important in this particular sense. It's all about accelerating and speeding up the decarbonization process in the work that I do. But the same thing goes with the proposition of a remedy bond, whereby, of course, you enable companies to act on remedy, to provide remedy in a shorter time frame than would be the case if they were left to their own devices and they would have to pay for the remedy out of their own expenses. And that, of course, is where, you know, this is a really, I think, really worthwhile addition and something that I definitely hope will be picked up, because precisely so, you can have remedy, that's fantastic, but those people need the money now, not in 10 years, not in 20 years, not even in 5, they need it now. And that's where I think this remedy bond can really help in bridging that temporal gap, if you will. And also by, you know, getting the money together in one bond or fund, you know, the exact structure, of course, is up for debate. But if you have that money combined, then there's no direct link with one individual company, because, you know, somewhere it's well, I think it was said already, you know, there's a stigma attached to that when you start providing money for a company to pay its debt, if you will. And by combining this and making this a platform, you know, you enable investors that are out there that want to have not only financial returns but also societal or environmental impact in the impact investing community. It's growing every day, literally every day. And so you've got money that is not only interested in financial returns but also in those broader community returns. And you know, they are there, they want to provide that money, and I think that this is bringing together those the demand and the supply and solving real issues. So,
and I think what's been really interesting actually in the conversations we've all been having is the sustainability people are worried that nobody would want to fund this, but are increasingly convinced they know how to do it. So how actually to repay recruitment fees. Whereas the financial people think, goodness, how on earth would you actually repay the recruitment fees? We have no clue about that. But we are very, very convinced that the money is out there. And I suppose my mission in all of this is to get these two sides talking to each other, because as Martin has said, in all our conversations with the financial, particularly amongst impact investors, bond investors, people who are interested in social bonds, it seems that the money is out there. So Martin, in the end, would you say this could be a commercial proposition? I mean, this could be a proposition that would fly on the bond market.
I think it will. I think it does. I think it will. And again, it depends a little bit on how you structure it, and with first loss guarantees and what have you. So, because of the environment, the impact on labor conditions, on labor rights, I think there's also a very big case to be made to make this into a blended finance construction wherein, for instance, governments step up and support, by guaranteeing, any possible negative impacts. But overall, these are companies, that's also be brought in mind. These are companies that are thriving, that are economically active, and they want to do the right thing. Now, the only thing that we need to do is help them do the right thing. And, and they will be able to thrive. So, sorry, the short answer is yes, I do believe that this can be very commercial.
And it's wonderful to hear you say that, Martin, because I think, as I keep on saying, there's a lack of confidence amongst sustainability people about how all this stuff works. And I think working with you has been super helpful in trying to demystify all of that. So, Johan, as the non-bank banker, anything to add to that? And specifically, what about the practical wrinkles? How can we make sure the money actually gets through to workers and isn't trousered by some wicked person along the way, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, well, two things to add to that question. First of all, the bankers in my organization and beyond, they ask, what's the business case? What you're paying out recruitment fees? What's the return? There's the business case doesn't come around if there's no repayment somewhere. Well, let's not forget that a couple of the companies at stake here would lose or have lost access to market, and regaining that access to market or retaining existing access to market with the increasing number of market blocks, it is contributing to that business case largely and convincingly. And then secondly, there are international rules set up by the International Capital Markets Association and by the Loan Markets Association, and these make sure that the financial structure works according to rules that have been internationally agreed. And they add up with the rules that you, Rosie, and your organization have established for the operational part between the employers and their employees that have paid these recruitment fees in the past. Now, that combination makes actually the new way of operating on labor markets the new normal. So it as Martin rightly said, it accelerates a move towards a labor market that no longer considers the payment of recruitment fees a normal thing, and actually catches up with that history by making the repayment very quickly, facilitated by the structure, the remediation bond as we propose it here.
Absolutely. And this idea of building back better. So the requirements to, if you're an employer and you're accessing a loan from the bond, the requirement is not only that you use that money to repay the workers, and that is verified, but also that you build back better, that you do it better next time. And certainly our fieldwork shows that after a repayment, the shock of a repayment means that employers do take more care over due diligence. But we can add to that with the structures around this bond by making it perhaps linked to interest rates, for example. So those who build back better, maybe their interest rate is lower than those who perhaps don't build back better. So, Heidi,
Absolutely.
yeah, I'm just going to go to Heidi now. I mean, it's all getting very exciting. I myself am now very, very excited by listening to everyone talking in this way. How can we ensure, you mentioned this a bit at the beginning, but I think I'd like to go back to it now. How can we ensure that this isn't just like a one-shot stimulus package, but it's linked towards costing in things which are currently external, so costing in externalities from henceforth, from now on in?
Brilliant question, and one that we've had on our minds exactly the same. Look, I think part of what's needed, and we started to touch on it, is the conditionality, so that this loan has some strings attached. And some of those strings are things like forward-looking controls and improvements in management systems, right? And those can sound terribly boring, but when the rubber meets the road, those are what is going to make this stick. So I think going into this sort of cycle, understanding this is one tool in the toolbox, and it's meant to look backward, but there's a condition about also looking forward. And every recruitment drive to come, what we are working with businesses in our global supply chains to understand, to activate, also through the guidance forthcoming in the consumer goods forum, is this idea that every recruitment drive to come, you will check and verify. And if repayment is needed, it will happen. But the idea is that obviously this diminishes over time, and that there are new contractual levers that are in place. There are new service level agreements. Really, the companies start to manage their labor supply chain in a similar way to some high impact raw material supply chains, in the sense of transparency, traceability, and consolidation or simplification of the labor supply chain. So I think those two concepts, that the loan itself has some strong and clear conditions, and that brands or retailers are really encouraging one set of expectations for suppliers that look at a cycle, not just a one and done, but sort of both sides of that coin.
Yeah, no, great. And actually, it's interesting that you start to look at this in market terms. And this makes me want to turn to Didier and say, look, how does collaboration come into this picture? Obviously, we need to be careful on antitrust and all of that kind of stuff. But how can we collaborate to make this happen, make this a reality, so as to change labour markets and to change the way that business operates in this area?
Well, I think that this is where the beauty of finance strikes forward, because it brings people together in one very elegant way. As Heidi mentioned, I mean, a company like Mars can be remote, like up to 12 tiers when it comes to sourcing raw materials that are needed. So the issues of unethical recruitment are, of course, part of the value chain, but are happening at a stage where it's difficult to intervene. And by connecting the dots, so this bond can help, well, responsible companies like Mars to effectively help in supporting its inception and its functioning, while providing then access to other layers of the value chain, with the possibility to issue loans to repay back the fees in a very expeditive manner. And that gets everyone around, with the possibility to make money do good, and obviously keep the workers in mind when we know they need the cash back now, because they shouldn't have been taking it away from them in the first place. So this is really an interesting continuum covering the entire value chain, but providing benefits at all stages in a, I would hope, very simple manner, which makes sense not only for chief sustainability officers, as we realized, but it actually has a very positive echo for our chief finance officer, which traditionally we work less with. But if you can get the internal momentum or impetus within a company to happen thanks to such ID that in the end build bridge between departments that whatever we think still can continue to work in silos, you are really making this a part of business operation across the value chain and guarantee that recruitment can happen. Last but not least, what is also very important in the way fees are being considered today, I think that at certain levels of the supply chain, they are being repaid. You were talking about a famous glove company, but many others are already repaying on a regular basis and are doing the investigation back into the country of origin to make sure they source labor responsibly. But most of them will tell you that they still need produce coming from small farmers, smallholders, and smaller companies, especially in the palm sector, for instance, but that they would lack the access to financing. And this tool, which is one tool in the toolbox, can really help in making sure everybody can do its share. Not that they didn't want to, but they were not in the capacity of. And thanks to that, this is where suddenly finances is being this lubricant that really helps everybody to be more responsible. And hopefully, as Heidi also mentioned, because never forget that, make recruitment fees history. No worker should pay for a job. So it's also limited in time type of usage of such tool that we need to contemplate. But I think that if it functions well, I'm already contemplating evolutions in what it could be used as a purpose that could effectively be much nicer than doing no harm, but trying to do good.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we're all very excited by opportunities for what I call bondification, because in a sense, where there's a problem or an opportunity, thinking in this way can transform the way we're able to approach that. So I think probably it's very intense, this subject. So probably I think we should stop at this point. And I'd like to thank everybody for participating in this session, and particularly to the panel who have given hours and hours of their time to think through how this could work. So I think we're now looking at an elegant and workable solution to one of the big structural problems that is there preventing the development of fair and responsible recruitment. So I'd like to end really with an invitation. Please do reach out if you'd like to know more, if you have something to contribute, or if you just like to understand more about what the potential is and what we can do together next. On the website, there will also be a PDF explainer, which sets out some more of the technical stuff that Johan was taking us through. But hopefully this is the beginning of a conversation which could really help to solve this problem that many of us in the sustainability world have been tackling for the last 12 years. So hopefully this is one of the big leaps forward. Thank you very much, everybody, for your participation, your openness, your transparency, and let's continue the conversation. Thank you.